The humid Miami air hung thick with tension as 3-year-old Lily Martinez pressed her small face against the cool window of her grandmother's third-floor apartment. The digital clock on the kitchen counter glowed 11:47 p.m., but sleep was impossible. With all the shouting echoing through the courtyard of Palmetto Heights housing complex, Abuela Rosa had tucked her into bed hours ago, but the angry voices outside kept pulling her back to the window like a magnet. Lily's tiny fingers gripped her worn teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, tighter as she watched the scene unfold below. The courtyard, usually filled with children playing soccer and families grilling on weekends, had transformed into something from her worst nightmares. Blue and red lights flashed against the palm trees, casting eerie shadows that danced across the cracked concrete. She could see Officer Dave Thompson clearly under the harsh spotlight mounted on his patrol car. Lily recognized him from the community barbecues, where he would let kids pet his police dog and try on his hat. But tonight, Thompson looked different, angrier, scarier. His usually neat uniform was disheveled, and his face was twisted with an expression Lily had never seen before. Even Atlas, his magnificent German shepherd, seemed different. The dog's ears were pinned back, and his body was coiled like a spring ready to explode. "Please, officer, I didn't do anything wrong." The voice belonged to Carlos Rivera, a young man Lily had seen countless times carrying groceries for elderly residents and playing with children in the playground. Carlos worked at the auto shop down the street and always smiled and waved when he saw Lily on the balcony. Tonight, Carlos was pressed against the brick wall of Building C, his hands raised high above his head, trembling visibly even from 3 floors up. Lily watched in fascination and growing fear as Thompson circled Carlos like a predator. The officer's hand rested on his gun, and his voice carried up to her window with crystal clarity in the still night air. "Shut up. I know what you saw. Rivera, you should have minded your own business." "I don't know what you're talking about, man. I was just getting formula for my baby. My wife is waiting." "Your wife is going to be waiting a long time," Thompson interrupted, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried further than his shouts. Lily's 3-year-old mind couldn't fully process the adult complexities of what she was witnessing, but her instincts screamed danger. She had never seen Officer Thompson act this way during his friendly visits to the complex. This wasn't the same man who had given her a police badge sticker just last month and told her to stay safe, little princess. The other police officers, who usually accompanied Thompson, were nowhere to be seen. The courtyard was eerily empty, except for these 2 men and the dog. Even Mrs. Gonzalez from 2B, who never missed any drama in the complex, had her windows tightly shut and curtains drawn. Atlas began to growl, a low rumbling sound that made Lily's stomach clench with fear. The dog's training was evident in his controlled aggression. He was waiting for a command, muscles tense and ready. Thompson's hand moved to Atlas's leash, and he leaned down to whisper something in the dog's ear that Lily couldn't hear. "Officer, please. I have a family. My little girl is only 6 months old." Carlos's voice cracked with desperation. "Should have thought about that before you became a problem," Thompson snarled. What happened next would replay in Lily's mind for months to come. Thompson gave Atlas a sharp hand signal, not the friendly gestures Lily had seen during the community demonstrations, but something darker, more violent. The dog's demeanor changed instantly from controlled aggression to lethal intent. "Atlas, eliminate!" Thompson's command rang out clear as a bell in the night air. The attack was swift and brutal. Atlas launched himself at Carlos with the precision of a trained killer, not the controlled takedown of a police dog. Lily watched in horror as the 90-pound German shepherd knocked Carlos to the ground and went straight for his throat. The sounds that followed Carlos's screams, the dog's snarls, Thompson's encouraging shouts, would haunt her dreams for months. Lily wanted to scream, to run to Abuela's room, to hide under her bed, but she was frozen with terror. Her small body trembled as she witnessed something no child should ever see. The attack seemed to last forever, but in reality, it was over in less than 2 minutes. Carlos's struggles grew weaker, then stopped altogether. Thompson stood over the motionless body, breathing heavily. He reached down and checked Carlos's pulse, then pulled out his radio. But instead of calling for an ambulance, Lily heard him say, "Dispatch, Officer Thompson. Suspect down at Palmetto Heights. Need backup and a meat wagon." The casual way he called for a body removal sent chills through Lily's tiny frame. This wasn't an accident or self-defense. This was something planned, something evil. As Thompson began setting up the scene, moving items around and positioning Carlos's body differently, Lily finally found the strength to move. She stumbled backward from the window, clutching Mr. Buttons so tightly that one of his button eyes popped off and rolled across the floor. When Abuela Rosa found her granddaughter the next morning, Lily was still huddled in the corner of the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The normally chatty toddler who filled the house with laughter and endless questions had retreated deep inside herself, carrying the terrible secret of what she had witnessed in the courtyard below. The official police report would claim that Carlos Rivera attacked Officer Thompson during a routine drug investigation, forcing the officer to deploy his canine partner in self-defense. But Lily Martinez knew the truth. She had watched a cold-blooded murder disguised as police work, and that knowledge was now locked inside her traumatized 3-year-old mind. Detective Rachel Stone's steel-gray eyes swept across the crime scene at 6:47 a.m., her 23 years of experience immediately detecting the subtle wrongness that permeated the Palmetto Heights courtyard. The morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings, but couldn't hide the inconsistencies that made her stomach clench with suspicion. Carlos Rivera's body lay in an unnatural position near the brick wall of Building C, surrounded by evidence markers and the controlled chaos of a police investigation already 4 hours old. "What do we have, Martinez?" Stone asked the rookie detective who had caught the initial call. Detective Luis Martinez consulted his notepad nervously. At 26, he was eager to impress and terrified of making mistakes. Victim is Carlos Rivera, 28. Works at Ramirez Auto Shop on Cale Ocho. Officer Thompson responded to reports of drug activity around 11:30 p.m. Claims Rivera attacked him with a knife during questioning, forcing him to deploy his canine partner Atlas for protection. Stone knelt beside the body, her trained eyes cataloging every detail. Carlos lay on his back, arms positioned neatly at his sides, but something felt staged about the scene. "Where's the weapon?" "That's the thing, Detective. No knife was recovered. Thompson claims Rivera must have thrown it over the fence before Atlas took him down." Martinez pointed toward the chain-link fence separating the complex from an empty lot. "Crime scene techs are still searching. Convenient." Stone examined Carlos's hands through her latex gloves. His fingernails were clean, no defensive wounds, no evidence he had gripped a weapon. The fatal injuries were concentrated around his throat, devastating wounds that suggested prolonged attack rather than a quick takedown. "This doesn't look like standard K9 apprehension technique." Officer Dave Thompson approached, his uniform immaculate despite supposedly being involved in a life-or-death struggle just hours earlier. His sandy hair was perfectly combed, his boots shined, and his demeanor was that of a man completely in control. "Detective Stone, I've prepared my preliminary report." Stone stood, studying Thompson's face. She had worked with him on several cases over the past 5 years. He was known for his attention to detail and professional demeanor, but something in his eyes today seemed different, colder, more calculating. Walk me through what happened, Thompson. I received an anonymous tip about drug activity in the courtyard around 11:15 p.m. When I arrived, I observed Rivera engaging in what appeared to be a hand-to-hand drug transaction with an unknown subject, who fled when he saw my patrol car. Thompson's voice was steady, rehearsed. I approached Rivera for questioning. He became agitated, reached into his jacket, and produced a knife. When he lunged at me, I gave Atlas the command to protect. Any witnesses? Thompson shook his head. The complex was quiet. Most residents were asleep. But Stone had already noticed the apartments with drawn curtains and sensed the unusual silence that hung over the normally bustling housing complex. In her experience, violent incidents always drew curious onlookers. Yet today, the courtyard felt artificially empty. I'll need to speak with residents who might have heard the altercation, Stone said. Already canvassed the area, Thompson replied quickly. No one saw anything useful. Stone's suspicion deepened. Thompson was being unusually thorough for an officer who had just been through a traumatic incident. Most cops in his situation would be shaky, dealing with paperwork and psychological evaluation. Instead, Thompson seemed to be actively managing the investigation. Dr. Maria Santos, the medical examiner, emerged from her preliminary examination of the body. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s, Dr. Santos had seen every type of violent death Miami could produce. Detective Stone, I need to speak with you privately. They walked to the edge of the courtyard, out of Thompson's earshot. Dr. Santos pulled off her gloves with sharp, angry movements. Rachel, I've examined hundreds of K-9 attack victims. This doesn't match the pattern. Explain. Standard police dog takedowns target extremities, arms, legs to immobilize suspects. These wounds are concentrated on the throat and chest, designed to kill, not subdue. The bite pattern suggests the attack continued well after the victim was incapacitated. Dr. Santos lowered her voice. This wasn't protection, Rachel. This was execution. Stone felt her pulse quicken. How certain are you? Certain enough to stake my career on it. Someone trained that dog to kill, not arrest. As Dr. Santos spoke, Stone noticed Captain Bill Morrison approaching across the courtyard. Morrison was a political animal who had climbed the ranks through careful alliances rather than detective work. His presence at a routine officer-involved incident was unusual and troubling. Stone. Morrison's voice carried authority and warning. Need to see you immediately. In Morrison's air-conditioned patrol car, the conversation was brief and pointed. This is a clean shooting, detective. Officer defended himself with appropriate force. I want your report to reflect that. Captain, there are inconsistencies that need investigation. There are no inconsistencies. Morrison's tone brooked no argument. Thompson is a decorated officer with an exemplary record. Rivera was a known associate of local drug dealers. Case closed. Stone stared at her superior officer, understanding dawning like ice water in her veins. You're ordering me to falsify my report? I'm ordering you to do your job correctly. Thompson acted in self-defense. End of story. Morrison started the engine. Effective immediately. You're reassigned to desk duty. Detective Martinez will complete this investigation. As Morrison drove away, Stone realized the full scope of what she was facing. This wasn't just a bad shooting, covered up by departmental loyalty. This was organized, systematic corruption that reached high into the police hierarchy. Someone with significant power wanted Carlos Rivera dead and was using Thompson as their instrument. But Stone had noticed something Morrison and Thompson had missed. In Building B, 3rd floor, she had glimpsed a small face at a window, a child's face that had quickly disappeared when she looked up. Somewhere in this complex was a witness, and if Stone could find them before the cover-up buried the truth forever, she might be able to expose the conspiracy that had cost an innocent man his life. The war for justice was just beginning. Isabella Rivera stood in the sterile hallway of Jackson Memorial Hospital, her newborn daughter Sophia cradled against her chest, staring at the closed door of the morgue. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't mask the underlying scent of death that permeated the building. 3 days had passed since police officers knocked on her door at 3:17 a.m. to deliver news that would shatter her world forever. Mrs. Rivera? The voice belonged to Detective Luis Martinez, young and uncertain, clearly uncomfortable with his role as bearer of terrible news. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few more questions about your husband's activities that night. Isabella's dark eyes flashed with anger she had been suppressing for 72 hours. Activities? Carlos went to buy formula for our baby. That's not an activity, Detective. That's being a father. Martinez shifted nervously, consulting his notepad. According to our investigation, your husband was involved in drug-related activities. Stop. Isabella's voice cut through his. Rehearsed words like a blade. My husband worked 60 hours a week at the auto shop. He came home every night, helped with dinner, read stories to my sister's children, and fell asleep watching cartoons. The only drugs Carlos ever touched were the Tylenol I gave him for his back pain. The detective's discomfort was obvious. Mrs. Rivera, I understand you're grieving, but Officer Thompson's report indicates Officer Thompson is a liar. The words hung in the antiseptic air like an accusation that could not be taken back. Isabella had spent 3 sleepless nights replaying every interaction her family had ever had with the Miami Police Department, and one memory kept surfacing with crystal clarity. 2 months ago, Carlos had witnessed something that had troubled him deeply. Late one evening, while walking home from his second job cleaning offices, he had seen Officer Thompson meeting with known drug dealers behind the abandoned warehouse on 23rd Street. Carlos had agonized over whether to report it, worried about retaliation, but tormented by his conscience. He had finally decided to make an anonymous tip to Internal Affairs just 1 week before his death. Detective, I want to speak with whoever is really in charge of this investigation, Isabella demanded. I am in charge, Mom. Captain Morrison. Assign me Captain Morrison? Isabella's blood chilled. Carlos had mentioned that name in connection with the corruption he had witnessed. I want to speak with someone from outside this precinct. Someone who doesn't answer to Captain Morrison. Martinez's face revealed that he understood more than he was admitting. Mrs. Rivera, I strongly advise you to accept that this was a justified use of force. Fighting the department won't bring your husband back, and it could make things difficult for your family. The thinly veiled threat ignited something fierce within Isabella's grief-stricken heart. She clutched Sophia tighter and stepped closer. To the young detective. Are you threatening my family, Detective Martinez? I'm just saying, sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. That afternoon, Isabella sat in the cramped waiting room of Webb and Associates, a law firm famous for taking on impossible cases against powerful institutions. The office walls were lined with newspaper clippings documenting Marcus Webb's victories against corrupt cops, crooked politicians, and corporate giants who thought they were above the law. Marcus Webb himself was nothing like Isabella had expected. Instead of the slick, expensive suit she had imagined, he wore a rumpled shirt and jeans, his graying hair disheveled from running his hands through it while reading case files. But his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a predator who had never lost his appetite for justice. Mrs. Rivera, I'll be honest with you, Webb said, leaning back in his chair surrounded by towers of legal documents. Cases like this are nearly impossible to win. The police have resources, witnesses disappear, evidence vanishes, and juries are reluctant to convict cops. But you've won before, Isabella said, gesturing to the wall of victory headlines. I've won when I had evidence. Right now, all we have is your husband's character and your certainty that he was murdered. That's not enough to challenge the entire Miami Police Department. Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out Carlos's cell phone, which police had returned with his personal effects. 3 days before he died, Carlos called Internal Affairs. He left a message reporting corruption he had witnessed. The call log shows he spoke to someone for 12 minutes. Webb's attention sharpened immediately. Do you know what he reported? He saw Officer Thompson meeting with drug dealers behind the warehouse on 23rd Street. Carlos was scared, but he couldn't live with staying silent. Isabella's voice broke. I think they killed him because he was going to expose them. For the first time since Isabella had entered his office, Webb leaned forward with genuine interest. Mrs. Rivera, if your husband made an official corruption report, there should be a recording and a case file. If we can prove Thompson was under investigation for drug-related corruption when he killed Carlos... you'll take our case? Webb studied Isabella's determined face, seeing the same fierce resolve that had driven him to dedicate his career to fighting powerful institutions that preyed on the powerless. I'll take your case, but I need you to understand what you're signing up for. They'll investigate your family's finances, your immigration status, your work history. They'll look for any excuse to destroy your credibility. Let them look, Isabella said firmly. We have nothing to hide. They'll follow you, intimidate witnesses, maybe even threaten your safety. These people killed your husband to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to escalate if they feel cornered. Isabella looked down at baby Sophia, who had fallen, asleep in her arms, innocent and trusting. This little girl would grow up without her father because of corruption and greed. That injustice burned in Isabella's chest like acid. Mr. Webb, my husband died because he tried to do the right thing. If I don't fight for him now, his death means nothing. Sophia deserves to know that her father was a hero, not the criminal they're trying to make him out to be. Webb nodded slowly, recognizing the steel in Isabella's voice that separated survivors from victims. Then we go to war, Mrs. Rivera, but we're going to need a miracle to win. Neither of them knew that their miracle was sleeping fitfully in a third-floor apartment just 3 miles away. A traumatized 3-year-old girl whose testimony could expose the entire conspiracy. If they could find her before the cover-up buried the truth forever. Dr. Jennifer Walsh adjusted the soft lighting in her child therapy office as she prepared for another session with Lily Martinez. 4 weeks had passed since the traumatized 3-year-old had been brought to her by a desperate grandmother who whispered about nightmares, screening fits, and a little girl who had simply stopped speaking. The playroom was carefully designed to feel safe and non-threatening, with pastel colors, soft furniture, and toys specifically chosen to help children process trauma. Lily sat in the corner as always, her knees drawn up to her chest, clutching the same teddy bear she had carried since the night everything changed. Mr. Buttons was showing signs of wear from countless hours of desperate hugging. One button eye was missing, and his fur was matted from tears and constant handling. The little girl's dark eyes stared blankly at the wall, lost in memories that her 3-year-old mind couldn't fully comprehend, but couldn't escape. Good morning, Lily, Dr. Walsh said softly, settling into her chair across from the child. Would you like to play with some toys today? Silence. It was always silence at first. Dr. Walsh had been treating traumatized children for 15 years, but Lily's case was particularly heartbreaking. The child had witnessed something so devastating that her mind had essentially shut down to protect itself. Traditional talk therapy was impossible with a non-verbal 3-year-old, so Dr. Walsh relied on play therapy, art therapy, and careful observation to understand what had happened that night. I brought some new crayons today, Dr. Walsh continued, opening a box of bright colors. Would you like to draw with me? Lily's only response was to hug Mr. Buttons tighter. For the first 3 weeks, their sessions had followed the same pattern. Lily would sit in her corner, Dr. Walsh would try various gentle approaches, and the little girl would remain locked in her traumatic silence. But today, Dr. Walsh had decided to try something different. She had spent the previous evening researching the details of the case that had brought Lily to her office, and she had a theory about what might unlock the child's memories. From her toy chest, Dr. Walsh carefully selected several items: a toy, police car, small action figures, and most importantly, a realistic-looking toy German Shepherd. She arranged them on the carpet between herself and Lily, then sat back to observe the child's reaction. The change was immediate and dramatic. Lily's eyes widened with terror, and she scrambled backward until she hit the wall, her small body trembling violently. Mr. Buttons fell from her grasp as she pressed herself against the corner, making small whimpering sounds that were the first vocalizations Dr. Walsh had heard from her. "It's okay, Lily. They're just toys. They can't hurt you," Dr. Walsh said gently, but she made no move to put the toys away. Sometimes breakthrough required walking through the fear, not around it. Lily's breathing became rapid and shallow, classic signs of a panic attack. But instead of retreating further into herself, as she had done for weeks, something different happened. Her terrified gaze became fixed on the toy German Shepherd, and her tiny index finger began to shake as she pointed at it. "Lily, can you tell me about the doggy?" Dr. Walsh asked softly. The little girl's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Dr. Walsh waited patiently, recognizing that they were on the verge of a breakthrough that could change everything. "Bad," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible after weeks of silence. The single word hung in the air like a prayer answered. Dr. Walsh felt her heart racing, but forced herself to remain calm and encouraging. "The doggy was bad?" Lily nodded vigorously, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. She pointed at the toy police officer figure. "Bad man, bad doggy. Can you show me what the bad man and bad doggy did?" Dr. Walsh asked, moving the toys closer to Lily. For the next 20 minutes, using simple words and gestures, Lily began to recreate the night that had stolen her voice. She moved the police officer figure around the toy German Shepherd, making it point and give commands. She demonstrated how the dog had attacked, using violence that shocked Dr. Walsh with its accuracy and detail. "The bad man told the doggy to hurt someone?" Dr. Walsh asked. "Kill him," Lily suddenly shouted, her voice carrying all the terror and confusion of that night. "Bad man say kill him." Dr. Walsh's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a story of police protection gone wrong. This was a child describing a murder she had witnessed. The implications were staggering. "Lily, where did you see this happen?" The little girl pointed toward the window. "Outside. Saw from window. Man crying. Bad doggy hurt him bad." Her words came in broken fragments, but each one was another piece of evidence that could change everything. Over the following sessions, Dr. Walsh carefully helped Lily reconstruct more details of that night. The child described the sound screaming, growling, the man begging for his life. She remembered the bad man Thompson talking on his radio afterward, and how he moved things around the yard. Most importantly, she remembered the command that had turned Atlas from a police dog into a weapon of murder. Dr. Walsh faced an ethical and legal dilemma that kept her awake at night. Client confidentiality was sacred in her profession, especially with children. But Lily had witnessed a murder, and someone was covering it up. An innocent man was being slandered while his killer walked free. The decision became clearer when Rosa Martinez, Lily's grandmother, revealed that strange men had been watching their apartment and asking neighbors questions about what Lily might have seen that night. Someone knew there was a witness, and they were getting closer to finding her. "Dr. Walsh," Rosa said during a private conversation, "my granddaughter is in danger, isn't she?" "Mrs. Martinez, I believe Lily witnessed something that certain people would prefer to keep secret." "Yes, she could be in danger." Rosa's weathered hands shook as she processed this information. "What do we do? Who can we trust?" Dr. Walsh had been asking herself the same questions. The police couldn't be trusted if they were involved in the cover-up. But there had to be someone fighting for justice, someone who could protect Lily while ensuring her testimony reached the right people. That evening, Dr. Walsh made a decision that would violate every protocol she had ever followed, but might save an innocent child's life. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Webb and Associates, the law firm she had seen on the news representing Carlos Rivera's widow. "Mr. Webb? This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh. I have information about the Rivera case that you need to hear. But first, I need your word that you'll protect the safety of a 3-year-old witness." A breakthrough had come, but it had also set in motion events that would put everyone involved in mortal danger. The conspiracy that had killed Carlos. Rivera now had a new target, a traumatized little girl whose recovered memories could destroy them all. The Miami-Dade County courthouse resembled a fortress under siege as dawn broke on October 15th. News vans lined Northwest 1st Avenue for 6 blocks in each direction, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray morning sky like mechanical flowers seeking light. Protesters had been camping outside for 3 days, some demanding justice for Carlos Rivera, others supporting Officer Dave Thompson and the police force. The tension was so thick that riot police in full gear stood at every entrance, their shields reflecting the flashing lights of cameras and emergency vehicles. Inside courtroom 6A, Judge Patricia Williams surveyed the packed gallery with the stern expression of someone who had presided over Miami's most volatile cases for 23 years. At 61, she was known for running an iron-tight courtroom, where lawyers feared to step out of line, and spectators understood that one disruption meant immediate ejection. Today would test every ounce of her authority. The prosecution table buzzed with controlled energy as Assistant District Attorney Elena Vasquez reviewed her opening statement for the 100th time. At 38, Vasquez was the daughter of Cuban immigrants who had instilled in her an unshakable belief in American justice. She had built her career prosecuting corrupt officials and had never lost a case she believed in. But this case was different. The entire Miami Police Department seemed aligned against her, and her key witness was a traumatized 3-year-old child whose testimony could be dismissed as unreliable. Beside her sat Isabella Rivera, clutching a photograph of Carlos that had been taken just weeks before his death. He was laughing in the picture, holding baby Sophia while helping his nephew with homework. Isabella had lost 15 pounds since becoming a widow, her once vibrant face now gaunt with grief and determination. She wore her best black dress and her grandmother's rosary, drawing strength from both faith and fury. Marcus Webb occupied the chair next to Isabella, his usually rumpled appearance replaced by an immaculate navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Webb understood the theater of high-profile trials. Every detail mattered when the jury was watching. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his expression confident but not arrogant. Behind his calm exterior, Webb's mind raced through the dozens of variables that could determine whether justice would prevail or corruption would triumph once again. The defense table presented a stark contrast in both appearance and support. Officer Dave Thompson sat ramrod straight in his dress blue uniform, every medal and ribbon precisely positioned. His 20-year service record was impeccable, and the police union had spared no expense in securing the most powerful legal representation money could buy. Defense attorney Jonathan Hamilton was a former prosecutor who had switched sides after discovering how much more money could be made protecting the wealthy and connected from consequences. Hamilton's strategy was simple but effective. Paint Carlos Rivera as a dangerous criminal whose death was both justified and inevitable. He had spent months cultivating relationships with local media, ensuring that stories about Rivera's alleged drug connections received prominent coverage, while Thompson's exemplary service record was highlighted at every opportunity. Captain Bill Morrison sat in the front row behind Thompson, his presence sending a clear message to everyone in the courtroom. The entire police department stood behind their officer. Morrison had orchestrated the cover-up with military precision, ensuring that evidence disappeared, witnesses became unavailable, and the official narrative remained unchallenged. But he hadn't anticipated the emergence of a child witness whose testimony could unravel everything he had worked to protect. Dr. Jennifer Walsh occupied a seat near the prosecution table, her role as Lily's therapist making her both advocate and protector. She had spent sleepless nights wrestling with the ethics of putting a traumatized 3-year-old through the ordeal of testifying in a murder trial. But Lily's own words had convinced her. Bad man hurt Carlos. Tell everyone so bad man can't. Hurt more people. The gallery was a sea of faces representing every faction in Miami's complex social and political landscape. Carlos's family filled 3 entire rows, their expressions ranging from grief to rage to desperate hope. Behind them sat members of Miami's Latino community, for whom Carlos had become a symbol of injustice and police brutality. Civil rights activists, local politicians positioning themselves for maximum publicity, and journalists for national news outlets completed the prosecution side. The defense side was equally packed, but with different faces. Police officers in uniform and civilian clothes, their wives and families, and members of the Fraternal Order of Police created a blue wall of solidarity. Conservative talk radio hosts who had made Thompson into a cause célèbre sat alongside wealthy donors who saw the case as part of a larger battle against what they perceived as attacks on law enforcement. Judge Williams called the court to order at exactly 9 a.m., her gavel striking with authority that silenced even the whispered conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to determine the facts surrounding the death of Carlos Rivera on the night of September 3rd. This court will tolerate no disruptions, no outbursts, and no demonstrations of any kind. Anyone who cannot control themselves will be removed immediately and barred from returning. Elena Vasquez rose to deliver her opening statement, her voice steady despite the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show that Officer Dave Thompson murdered Carlos Rivera in cold blood, using his position of authority and his police dog as weapons of execution rather than tools of justice. The courtroom stirred with tension as Vasquez continued. Carlos Rivera was not a criminal. He was a father, a husband, and a hard-working member of this community who made the fatal mistake of witnessing police corruption. The evidence will show that Officer Thompson killed Carlos to silence him, then constructed an elaborate lie to cover his tracks. Hamilton's response was equally powerful, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in Miami courtrooms. The evidence will show that Officer Thompson faced a life-threatening situation and responded exactly as his training dictated. Carlos Rivera attacked a police officer with a deadly weapon, and Officer Thompson's canine partner Atlas responded to protect his handler's life, as these heroic animals are trained to do. As the opening statements concluded, everyone in the courtroom understood that this trial would determine more than just Thompson's guilt or innocence. It would decide whether corruption could be exposed and punished, or whether power could successfully bury truth. And somewhere in a small apartment across town, a 3-year-old girl named Lily was preparing to face her nightmares in front of the world, carrying the hopes of justice on her tiny shoulders. The courthouse corridors fell into an unnatural hush as word spread that the most anticipated testimony in Miami's recent legal history was about to begin. Court officers had cleared the hallway leading to Courtroom 6A, creating a protected pathway for the tiny witness who would either validate or destroy the prosecution's case. Dr. Jennifer Walsh knelt beside 3-year-old Lily Martinez in the witness preparation room, her heart breaking as she watched the child clutch Mr. Buttons with trembling hands. "Remember what we practiced, sweetheart," Dr. Walsh whispered softly. "Just tell the truth about what you saw. I'll be right there with you the whole time." Lily's dark eyes, still haunted by nightmares, but burning with a 3-year-old's simple understanding of right and wrong, looked up at the woman who had helped her find her voice again. "Bad man needs to go away," she whispered, "so he can't hurt more people like Carlos." Judge Patricia Williams had transformed her courtroom into the most child-friendly environment possible while maintaining legal protocol. The witness stand had been modified with a smaller chair surrounded by soft cushions. Harsh courtroom lighting was dimmed to a gentler glow. Most importantly, she had exercised her discretion to clear the gallery of everyone except immediate family members, essential court personnel, and a small pool of media representatives. Even with these accommodations, the atmosphere crackled with tension that seemed to press down like a physical weight. Isabella Rivera sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face as she watched the little girl who held the key to her husband's justice. Beside her, Marcus Webb maintained his professional composure, but his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. This testimony would make or break their case, and everyone in the room understood the impossible burden being placed on such small shoulders. Officer Dave Thompson's confident demeanor had cracked slightly as the reality of facing his 3-year-old accuser set in. For weeks, his defense team had argued the child testimony was unreliable, that Lily was too traumatized to distinguish reality from nightmare. But Thompson's nervous fidgeting betrayed his fear that this little girl remembered everything with perfect clarity. Defense attorney Jonathan Hamilton rose immediately as Dr. Walsh and Lily entered the courtroom. "Your Honor, I must renew my objection to this entire proceeding. A 3-year-old child cannot be considered a competent witness. This is a circus, not a court of law." Judge Williams fixed Hamilton with a stare that had intimidated seasoned attorneys for over 2 decades. "Mr. Hamilton, I have already ruled on the child's competency after extensive evaluation. Your objection is noted and overruled. Dr. Walsh, please bring the witness forward." The walk from the courtroom door to the witness stand seemed to take an eternity. Lily's tiny sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the silence like gunshots. Court officers, hardened by years of witnessing human tragedy, found themselves blinking back unexpected tears as they watched the smallest witness in courthouse history make her way toward justice. Dr. Walsh helped Lily into the modified witness chair, positioning Mr. Buttons in her lap and ensuring she felt as secure as possible. The child psychologist had prepared extensively for this moment, knowing that any additional trauma could silence Lily forever while potentially invalidating her testimony. Elena. Vasquez approached with the careful movements of someone approaching a frightened animal. She had interviewed hundreds of witnesses throughout her career, but never one who could barely reach the microphone, even with the chair raised to its highest setting. "Hi, Lily," Vasquez said gently, her voice carrying none of the prosecutorial intensity she typically employed. "Can you tell everyone your name?" "Lily Maria Martinez," the child replied clearly, her voice tiny but audible throughout the hushed courtroom. "I'm 3 years old. Lily, do you remember the night when you saw something scary happen outside your window?" The child nodded solemnly. "The bad man hurt Carlos. Carlos was nice. He always waved at me." Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The description of him as the bad man from an innocent child, carrying more weight than any expert testimony about police procedures. Can you tell us what you saw that night, Lily? For the next 20 minutes, the courtroom listened in absolute silence as Lily recounted the events of September 3rd in her simple, devastating words. She described watching Carlos walk to the store. She remembered the police car arriving and the man in uniform getting out with his dog. She recalled Carlos raising his hands and saying he didn't do anything wrong. The policeman was very angry, Lily continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her courage. He told his doggy to hurt Carlos. Carlos was crying and asking to go home to his baby. Hamilton objected repeatedly, arguing that the child was confused or coached, but Judge Williams overruled each objection while maintaining careful attention to Lily's emotional state. The little girl's testimony was devastating in its simplicity and consistency with the forensic evidence. Lily, Vasquez asked gently, what exactly did the police officer tell his dog to do? The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment that would determine everything. Lily looked directly at Thompson, her 3-year-old eyes holding none of the fear they had carried for weeks. Instead, they blazed with the moral certainty that only children possess. He said, "Atlas, kill him," Lily stated clearly. Then the doggy attacked Carlos, and Carlos couldn't breathe anymore. The impact of those words was immediate and electric. Several jury members gasped audibly. Isabella Rivera sobbed openly. Thompson's face went ashen as his attorney frantically scribbled notes. But Lily wasn't finished. With the devastating honesty of childhood, she continued. After Carlos stopped moving, the bad man talked on his radio and moved things around. He was trying to make it look different than what really happened. Hamilton's cross-examination was brief and unsuccessful. Every attempt to confuse or contradict Lily only reinforced her credibility. Her story never wavered, never changed, never showed signs of coaching or manipulation. She was simply a little girl telling the truth about something terrible she had witnessed. As Dr. Walsh helped Lily down from the witness stand, the child stopped and looked back at Thompson one more time. "You should say sorry to Carlos's family," she said with the moral clarity that only innocence can provide. "What you did was very wrong." The courtroom remained silent long after Lily had left, her words hanging in the air like an indictment that no legal maneuvering could dismiss. A 3-year-old child had just destroyed a carefully constructed cover-up with nothing more than the truth, spoken in the simple language of childhood, but carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. The courtroom existed in a state of suspended tension as Elena Vasquez reached into her evidence box and withdrew what appeared to be an ordinary children's toy, a plush German shepherd that bore an uncanny resemblance to Atlas, the police dog. At the center of this explosive trial, the toy had been specially commissioned by Dr. Walsh during Lily's therapy sessions, designed to help the traumatized child process her memories without re-traumatizing her further. "Your Honor," Vasquez announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I would like to present Defense Exhibit, a therapeutic toy used by Dr. Walsh in her sessions with the witness." Defense attorney Jonathan Hamilton shot to his feet so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Objection. This is a deliberate attempt to manipulate the witness through props. My client has the right to a fair trial, not a puppet show designed to inflame the jury." Judge Patricia Williams considered the objection carefully. After 48 hours of testimony, she had watched Lily's courage grow stronger with each question answered. The child had proven herself to be remarkably resilient and truthful, but Williams also understood the delicate balance between protecting a child witness and ensuring due process. "Overruled," Williams declared. A toy was used in legitimate therapeutic sessions and has been properly entered into evidence. Proceed, Miss Vasquez. 3-year-old Lily Martinez sat in the modified witness chair, her legs swinging freely above the floor, clutching Mr. Buttons with one arm, while her other hand rested on the armrest. For 2 days, she had answered questions about that terrible night with a maturity that had stunned legal observers. But now, as the toy German Shepherd appeared, something fundamental shifted in the courtroom atmosphere. The child's dark eyes locked onto the plush dog with laser focus. Her small body began to tremble, not with fear as it had during her early therapy sessions, but with something else entirely. Recognition, memory, and beneath those emotions, a 3-year-old's pure, undiluted sense of justice. Officer Dave Thompson felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's controlled temperature. For weeks, his defense team had constructed an elaborate narrative about heroic police work and justified force. They had painted Carlos Rivera as a dangerous criminal whose death was both necessary and legal. But now, facing the innocent eyes of the child who had witnessed his crime, Thompson felt the walls of his carefully constructed lies beginning to crumble. "Lily," Vasquez said gently, holding the toy dog at eye level with the child, "I want you to look at this toy and tell me what it reminds you of." Lily's gaze never wavered from the plush German Shepherd. Her breathing became deeper, more focused, as if she were drawing strength from somewhere deep within her small frame. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of fluorescent lights became audible, creating an almost surreal backdrop for what was about to unfold. "That's like the bad doggy," Lily said clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom with perfect clarity. "Can you tell us more about the bad doggy?" Vasquez encouraged. For a moment, Lily said nothing. She studied the toy with the intense concentration that only children possess, as if she were seeing not just fabric and stuffing, but the living, breathing animal that had destroyed her sense of safety and cost Carlos Rivera his life. Thompson's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, probably advising him to maintain his composure. But Thompson's hands were visibly shaking now. Captain Morrison, seated in the gallery behind the defense table, leaned forward with the expression of a man watching his carefully orchestrated cover-up collapse in real time. Isabella Rivera sat motionless in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly around Carlos's photograph that her knuckles had turned white. She had waited 3 months for this moment, for someone to finally acknowledge that her husband had been murdered, not killed in self-defense. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, positioned where Lily could see her if the child needed reassurance, watched with professional fascination and personal anguish as her young patient prepared to relive the most traumatic moment of her short life. "The bad doggy hurt Carlos," Lily continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Carlos was scared. He was crying for his baby. What did the police officer do when Carlos was crying?" Vasquez asked, knowing she was approaching the crucial moment that would either convict or exonerate Thompson. Lily's eyes moved from the toy to Officer Thompson, sitting just 30 feet away in his crisp dress uniform. For a 3-year-old, 30 feet might as well have been 30 miles, but the moral distance between them was infinite. Here was innocence confronting evil, truth facing lies, justice demanding satisfaction. The bad man pointed at Carlos. Lily said, her small finger mimicking the gesture she had witnessed that terrible night. And then he yelled really loud. The courtroom held its breath. Vasquez knew that the next few seconds would determine not just the outcome of this trial, but whether corruption could triumph over truth, whether power could silence justice, whether a little girl's courage could expose the rot that had infected the Miami Police Department. What did the bad man yell, Lily? For one eternal moment, silence dominated the courtroom. Then, with the moral clarity that only innocence can provide, 3-year-old Lily Martinez pointed directly at Officer Dave Thompson and shouted 2 words that would echo through Miami's legal history. "Kill him." The impact was immediate and devastating. The courtroom erupted in chaos that Judge Williams had never experienced in her decades on the bench. Isabella Rivera collapsed into Marcus Webb's arms, sobbing with a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. Thompson leaped too, his feet shouting, "She's lying. That's not what happened." Before his attorney could restrain him, Hamilton frantically demanded a mistrial, while Captain Morrison rushed toward the exit, his cell phone already in hand, probably alerting his superiors that their carefully constructed cover-up had just been destroyed by the testimony of a 3-year-old child. "Kill him," Lily repeated, her voice cutting through the chaos with devastating clarity. "That's what the bad man said. Kill him." Judge Williams pounded her gavel repeatedly, but the explosion of emotion was beyond her control. Reporters scrambled for the exits, desperate to break the biggest story in Miami's recent memory. Police officers in the gallery sat in stunned silence, realizing that one of their own had just been exposed as a cold-blooded murderer. Those 2 words spoken by the smallest witness in courthouse history had just shattered a conspiracy, destroyed a cover-up, and proven that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the most innocent voices. The jury deliberation room buzzed with intense discussion as 12 Miami residents grappled with a decision that would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. After 5 days of testimony, mountains of evidence, and the devastating words of a 3-year-old witness, they faced a choice between institutional loyalty and moral truth. Foreman Maria Santos, a school principal who had spent 30 years protecting children, looked around the table at faces that reflected the community's complex demographics: teachers, mechanics, retirees, small business owners, all united in their revulsion at what they had witnessed. "I've seen a lot of children testify about trauma," said juror number 7, a pediatric nurse. That little girl wasn't coached. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what she saw, and what she saw was murder. Outside the courthouse, Miami held its breath. Protesters from both sides maintained their vigil, but the momentum had shifted dramatically since Lily's testimony. Even some police supporters had begun questioning Thompson's innocence, shaken by the moral clarity of a child's accusation. The local news had dubbed her the littlest witness, and her courage had inspired a national conversation about police accountability and the power of truth. After just 4 hours of deliberation, remarkable speed for such a complex case, the jury reached their verdict. As word spread through the courthouse, spectators rushed back to courtroom 6A, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and dread. Isabella Rivera sat in the front row, clutching baby Sophia against her chest, her rosary wrapped around her free hand. Marcus Webb maintained his professional composure, but his eyes betrayed the anxiety of a man who had staked his reputation on the testimony of a traumatized toddler. Officer Dave Thompson stood as the jury filed back into the courtroom. His dress blue uniform that had once symbolized honor and service, now feeling like a costume concealing his true nature. His wife sat directly behind him, her face a mask of denial and devastation, still unable to accept that the man she had married was capable of cold-blooded murder. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order with unusual solemnity. In her 23 years on the bench, she had presided over countless trials, but none that had touched her as deeply as watching a 3-year-old child find the courage to speak truth to power. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Williams asked. "We have, Your Honor," Foreman Santos replied, her voice steady and clear. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Carlos Rivera, we find the defendant, David Michael Thompson, guilty." The courtroom exploded. Isabella Rivera collapsed into Webb's arms, her cries of relief echoing off the walls. Thompson's wife screamed, "No," repeatedly while his supporters sat in stunned silence. Captain Morrison, who had orchestrated the cover-up from the beginning, quietly slipped out the back exit, already calculating his next moves to protect himself from the inevitable investigation that would follow. Thompson himself stood motionless, the reality of his situation finally penetrating the arrogance that had sustained him throughout the trial. The jury had seen through his lies, rejected his justifications, and chosen to believe a 3-year-old child over a decorated police officer. His 20-year career, his pension, his freedom, everything was gone, destroyed by 2 words, spoken with the moral authority that only innocence possesses. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later drew even larger crowds than the trial itself. Lily Martinez, accompanied by Dr. Walsh and her grandmother Rosa, did not testify again, but her presence in the courtroom served as a powerful reminder of the courage that had brought justice to Carlos Rivera's family. She had recovered remarkably well from her trauma, her nightmares fading as the truth was finally acknowledged, and a bad man faced consequences for his actions. Judge Williams sentenced Thompson to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that his abuse of police authority made his crime particularly heinous. "You took an oath to protect and serve," Williams told the disgraced officer. "Instead, you used your badge and your weapon as tools of murder. The betrayal of public trust demands the severest punishment this court can impose." Atlas, the German shepherd who had been transformed from protector to killer, was retired from police service and placed in a specialized rehabilitation program for working animals. Animal behaviorists determined that with proper training and therapy, he could potentially be retrained for non-aggressive work, possibly as a therapy dog for traumatized children, a poetic justice that brought tears to many eyes. The ripple effects of the trial spread far beyond Miami. The FBI launched a comprehensive investigation into corruption within the Miami Police Department, ultimately leading to the indictment of Captain Morrison and 17 other officers involved in various criminal enterprises. The scandal prompted nationwide reforms in police dog training protocols, with new emphasis on de-escalation rather than aggressive force. Dr. Jennifer Walsh published groundbreaking research on child witnesses in trauma cases, establishing protocols that would protect young victims while ensuring their voices could be heard in courtrooms across America. Her work with Lily became a model for helping children process trauma while maintaining their ability to seek justice. Isabella Rivera used the substantial settlement from her civil lawsuit to establish the Carlos Rivera Foundation for Police Accountability, providing legal assistance to families victimized by police brutality. She testified before Congress about the need for reform and became a powerful advocate for transparency in law enforcement. Marcus Webb's reputation as a crusader for justice was cemented by his victory in the Thompson case. He dedicated his practice exclusively to police misconduct cases, winning millions in settlements for victims' families, while forcing departments across Florida to reform their practices. But perhaps the most profound impact belonged to Lily Martinez herself. Now 4 years old and thriving in preschool, she had no memory of her brief fame as the littlest witness. What she retained was something more valuable than knowledge: that telling the truth, no matter how frightening, could protect other people from harm. On quiet evenings, when Rosa Martinez tucked her granddaughter into bed, Lily would sometimes ask about Carlos, the nice man who used to wave at her from the courtyard. Rosa would tell her that Carlos was watching over them from heaven, proud of the brave little girl who had made sure the bad man couldn't hurt anyone else. Justice had finally been served, delivered not by seasoned prosecutors or brilliant attorneys, but by a 3-year-old child whose simple honesty had proven more powerful than any cover-up, more convincing than any lie, and more enduring than any corruption. In a world where truth often seemed negotiable and power frequently triumphed over principle, Lily Martinez had reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest moral authority. The littlest witness had changed everything.